All right, good evening and welcome back to the last and final video of this series of the top 25 all-time White Sox players as told by me, White Sox fan card collector at YouTube. So this was a pretty fun experience able to put together. It was a lot of work just kind of putting it all together in one weekend. Probably if I had more time, probably would kind of get more creative on some of the things I might want to do for some of the imagery for it, but I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope this inspired some people to kind of put together some videos themselves, especially those that are content creators out there on YouTube. Would love to hear from you again. Happy to be contacted if you have any questions about like, what did I do to kind of put together and things like that, what things I was considering. Happy to be able to answer some of those questions, so feel free to connect with me as need be. All right, so we are down to the final five, but I want to do a brief recap of where we were at with the 25 up until now through 6. So number 25 was Chris Sale. Number 24 was Ray Durham. Number 23 was Early Wynn. Number 22 was Maglio Ordonez. Number 21 was Ray Schalk. Number 20 was Hoyt Wilhelm. Number 19 was Jose Abreu. Number 18 was Paul Konerko. Number 17 was Wilbur Wood. Number 14 was Doc White. Number 15 was Robin Ventura. Number 14 was Harold Baines. Number 13 was Billy Pierce. Number 12 was Carlton Fisk. Number 11 was Shoeless Joe Jackson. Number 10 was Nellie Fox. Number 9 was Luis Aparicio. Number 8 was Minnie Minoso. Number 7 was Mark Burley. And then number 6 was Ted Lyons, which leaves us to the final 5. I'm sure there's some guesses out there who might be on the list. Let's go ahead and get this started. This is actually going to be one of 2 pitchers that are in the top 5. And this is going to be one of a career war of 64 who spent his entire career with the White Sox, his entire Hall of Fame career with the White Sox. He was one of the Clean Sox who won 2 ERA titles and was part of the 1917 World Series team, but unfortunately was hurt during the 1919 World Series, so he wasn't able to participate. Who knows? If he wasn't, maybe they would have been able to have one of the pitchers that was tossing games not needed and could have been a very different outcome for the team. Who knows? But we got actually 2 players from that team that are going to be in this top 5 here, and he is the first, and that is Urban, also known as Red Faber. This is his 1933 Gaudy card. Haven't really featured too many Gaudy cards on this channel yet. Probably will do a video at some point in the future as I obtain a few more. But here's a Rep Faber card from 1933. He does have some cards through the 1920s, but they're not too many in comparison to like Babe Ruth or some other players that were much more coveted and collectible. The White Sox really weren't good after the team had to be torn apart in the 1920s. So he was one of the players, along with Schalk, who we mentioned earlier, who had to kind of go through the ordeal of having a team that just didn't have a lot of resources, and a place where a lot of players really didn't want to go play after kind of when trades would come up because of the things that happened between the team and Charles Comiskey and just sort of the spotlight that they were getting from that point. So Urban Red Faber is the guy that I listed here. I'm not sure if I mentioned that he also won 254 games, had a career ERA of 3.15. So this guy was pretty much a horse for them. He was also one of the knuckleballers that they had during that time, but also he was one of the last players that was allowed to use the spitball. If you're familiar with the spitball, it was grandfathered in after it was made a rule that you couldn't do it, that people who threw it before the rule came into effect could still using it. If I had to make a modern day equivalent, that would be like the pitchers that were using spider tack would still be allowed to use spider tack, even though the foreign substances would need to be removed. It's kind of a silly rule in hindsight. They probably just should have made it illegal across the board, but it was a very different time. All right. Now number 4 is actually a player that most people think of another team for this player and sometimes forget that he played for the White Sox. And this is going to be Eddie Collins. Eddie Collins definitely deserves to be on the list of all-time great White Sox, as he spent about equal parts of his career with the Philadelphia Athletics, which is the team he is known for in all of his World Series appearances, but also with the White Sox too. He had to ordeal also those bad teams of the 1920s before he was kind of went back to Philadelphia in the late 20s into early 30s. Was the highest paid player on the team, so he was not one of the players that was approached about throwing the World Series. So Eddie Collins was a solid player for us. He has the highest WAR of any of the players that are on this list here, but it's split right down the middle between Philadelphia and through the White Sox. So it was kind of hard to justify putting him much higher here, but I had to kind of reflect just like how valuable this kind of player was during his time. He had over 3,300 hits, which is a number you just don't see reached very often, and a career batting average of 333. Played before there were All-Star games, so there was nothing there to be able to kind of capture for him. He won an MVP award, but with the Oakland Athletics. So Eddie Collins, I thought, deserved a place on this list. It'll be a player I probably will feature at some point in a video, kind of talking about some of his challenges in the managerial office, which are something probably not to be very proud of in hindsight, if you kind of think about how the ripple effect happened thereafter. But that's time for another video. All right, so we're down to the final three. And they're going to be, I think, cards you've all seen on this channel before, but I've never had a chance to organize these players. And number 3 is going to be our last pitcher on the list. And how can you not honor the guy who has the lowest career ERA of any pitcher, and that's Ed Walsh, at somewhere being on this list, but somewhere being high on this list. So this is the Mecca double folders that I talked about in one of my earlier videos. If you want to look it up, I talked more about these cards. But here's the Ed Walsh. When I picked it up, it was the most expensive card, a graded card I'd ever bought at that point. And I just love the card itself. Talking about Ed Walsh, though, he kind of was a pitcher that kind of threw out his arm, as many pitchers did in his era. They would throw their arm off. I think he had the most starts and most completed games in a couple seasons back-to-back, and they were huge. Last guy to win 40 games in a season, too, so you have to pitch a lot to win that many games. That doesn't even count for the games that he lost either, or got a no decision. So again, I mentioned he had the lowest career ERA, but what is it? How about 1.82 for a career? That's amazing. So he was kind of the counterpart of like Christy Mathewson during this time. This was right before Walter Johnson started coming in, but obviously people think of Walter Johnson more because he had longer longevity and also struck out a whole lot more people and was much more of a successful career pitcher. Because Eddie Walsh kind of just blew out his arm and never was really heard of after he kind of did that, even though he tried to come back a few times. Struck out just over 1,700 for his career, but again, that's not what he's known for. And I think his short career of 13 seasons, much of which I think he was kind of trying to come back from his injury. He wasn't pitching much. He won 195 games. So it's not a number really to kind of laugh at. He was one of the star pitchers of the team that won the 1906 World Series for the White Sox, but he was already out of baseball, not on the White Sox by the time they won again in 1917. So he is number 3 on my list, which comes down to the last two. So when I started this video series, I mentioned the inspiration for this video was when I picked up the 1950 Bowman Luke Appling. That is not the card I'm going to show you right now, but I am going to put Luke Appling as number 2 on my list, and it's going to be his rookie card from 1934 Gowdy. Let me move it out a little bit forward for you so you can see it. Not the best condition card in the world, but I'm happy to have it as part of my collection as a White Sox fan. Luke Appling spent his entire 20 years with the White Sox and only missed a season when he was actually on military duty for World War II. Shortstop, career WAR of 77.6, career hit total of 2,749, drove in just over 1,100 home runs. He was known to be a really solid hitter who walked much more than he struck out. Career batting leader of 310, he hit 388 in one season, at a time where that wasn't happening very often, where hitters are hitting that high. That was the highest total, I think, until it was matched by Ted Williams in the 1950s. It was the highest total, I should say, since that Ted Williams hit over 400. That was the highest number until Ted Williams again hit 388 later in the 1950s. So definitely a pretty solid hitter. He was voted on as being the best all-time White Sox player by fans in, I think, 1969. If that was retaken today, I think it would be a different player, and that's going to be number 1 on my list. Last thing on Appling, he's won 2 AL batting titles, too, and was a 7-time All-Star. Started his career right about at the time when the All-Star games started happening, so that's a pretty reflective number of how many times he appeared. because it was around just about for the entirety of his career. So there weren't years where he couldn't go because there wasn't one. All right, finally, it's going to be the only modern card here. As you can see, these are cards all from the 1930s and the 1910s here, which kind of is cool. I didn't think about it as I was putting it together, but that makes it kind of a cool looking video. My favorite player, I featured him before when it was his birthday, which also I share his birthday. And I'm going to put him right here on the edge here is Frank Thomas. Oops, this is going to fall off a little bit. Let's see if I can get it to balance on there. It's not going to balance. Let's move it around a little bit so we can see it a little bit better. So let's move Ed Walsh to maybe the background over here and kind of lean him just against the background and move up this one so it'll hold a little better. And we have Frank Thomas here. It's an autographed rookie card of his. His autographs are pretty inexpensive to be able to pick up. And it's a great, obviously, all-time player. In my mind, the best player. And what kind of stood apart for me is that we only have 4 guys that ever won the MVP. One being Nellie Fox, one being Dick Allen. I'm trying to remember, Jose Abreu was the most recent one. But this guy won 2 and probably should have won a 3rd one in 2000. He lost it to Jason Giambi, who was later known to be a steroid user. So that's why I think Frank Thomas needs to be higher, just because I think his WAR total could be higher if you ever could find a reliable way of adjusting WAR to remove guys that were using steroids. His numbers would bump up along with like others like Ken Griffey Jr. who did not use. So I think some of his accomplishments get a little bit muted because of the era that he played in, but man, he was a heck of a hitter. For those of us in Chicago, you knew he was a real special player, even though on the national scale, maybe he was by the late 90s and early 2000s, you really didn't view him in the same way because you had, the Bonds, the Sosas, and the McGuires, but he was still producing during those times, just not at those levels. And it's been very adamant that he never did use steroids too, so I'm going to want to believe him there. Career 73.8 WAR, more known for his power numbers of 521 home runs and 1,704 RBIs and a 301 average. I mean, those are Hall of Fame numbers for sure. Appeared in 5 other All-Star games too. Was part of our 93 playoff team. Also was on the 2000 White Sox, but he was on the injured list when they won the 2005 World Series, but he does have a World Series ring with us. Frank Thomas, what more can you say? And that's it, guys. I hope you really enjoyed the series. Feel free to comment, let me know. Have a great weekend. And until next time, hope you guys have a great one.